always struggled, this salesman, to persuade people that the cost of the software, which was all kind of eye-wateringly high, was worthwhile. And when he read about anchoring, and anchoring, just for the listeners who don't know, is this principle which basically says that the first piece of information you see has a huge anchor. It influences the rest of the information you perceive.
Do you think then that is a essential part of B2B marketing now, that, the $10 million SaaS business needs the founder to be the face? Just a quick one before we get into the episode, because I've got an offer that I'm sure all of you will be interested in. AEO is something that every B2B marketing team is trying to figure out right now, and most just don't know where to start. But at Blend, we're offering a full AEO analysis of your brand's AI visibility, and we'll walk you through exactly what we found and what to do about it. From full prompt analysis against your competitors to a citation analysis, where we'll look at different content types and how you're being cited for those and mentioned in those, and what you can actually do to be mentioned and cited much more for your brand, and what content you should create going forwards, and how you comprise that strategy really. We will drop a note in the description of this episode in the show notes, and you can go over there, request your free AEO audit, and we will deliver that to you. Hi everyone, welcome back to Demand Decoded. Dan here with you as always, and on today's episode we have a guest joining us. It's Phill Agnew, who is host of Nudge. He's a behavioral scientist expert, speaker, well-known voice in the industry of behavioral science and its impact on go-to-market. And this was honestly one of the most enjoyable episodes I think I've ever recorded, especially with somebody external. Phil's just an awesome guy. I've listened to Nudge for a long time, and it's a really, really fantastic podcast. But Phill himself just has so much knowledge about behavioral science, about the studies that have actually found groundbreaking ways to connect with buyers, to actually understand their psychological behavior when they're going through the buying journey, and how to impact that. And we touch on loads of things in this podcast. I think things that stood out for me really is the way that Phill was able to draw on a lot of research that's happened, a lot of books that have been published, and that he was able to draw into our conversation to actually give grounding evidence into why a lot of these principles around behavioral science actually work. And we get into a few examples and things that you can actually pick up and take into your go-to-market straight away. And just a really fun conversation, actually. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. It was really fun getting to know Phill and seeing him as well as hearing him, because I'm so used to listening to Nudge, but not actually seeing his face, which was pretty funny and cool. But hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and let's get into it. Before we get into the podcast today, here's a quick word from our sponsors, HubSpot. Most businesses think they know their customers. They have the data, the records, the history, but it's scattered across 3 teams and 4 systems, which means nobody can actually use it. HubSpot connects it all. Every interaction, every support ticket, every conversation into one platform every team can work from. So when sales talk to a customer, marketing already know the full story. And when you know more, you grow more. Check out HubSpot.com, the agentic customer platform for growing businesses. The best starting place really, Phill, is to get to know you and like this journey on where you've come from, because I didn't know you actually had a real job. I just thought you were the host of Nudge, and that's what you've always done, because like to me, like Phill Agnew is Nudge. But I stalked you on LinkedIn heavily and realized that, oh wow, like Phill has like been around for a long time doing product marketing, and you've had a lot of roles that I'm sure have taught you a lot along the way. But tell us a bit about all of that and what brought you to create Nudge.
Yeah, cheers, Dan. When you say proper job, I imagine like I don't actually feel like I actually have had a proper job, like something where I haven't just been typing away on a laptop pretending to do something and calling it a
Yeah.
KPI. Although I did once serve the actor who played Boba Fett and that
Oh,
felt like a proper job waiting for
that's
him.
oh, well,
Um,
tell us more.
well, I was in New Zealand, and he came into a restaurant where I was working for 3 months. He came in twice. He was very nice. I didn't sort of say anything. I'm a big Star Wars fan, so I kind of wanted
Mhm.
a picture and stuff. But I didn't say anything. He's probably one of Kiwi's most famous actors, and the Kiwis are famous for not tipping. So this was always a bit of an annoying
Really?
job for me because
Wow.
I was like, the British guy who really tried to use all the behavioural science wisdom that I knew to get as many tips as possible, and nothing worked on the Kiwis. But occasionally you get an Italian in or a Spanish person that would tip, and it very, very exciting. But I thought, oh, Boba Fett's here. We're in for the big time. He came in
Oh,
twice, didn't tip a single penny.
come on, Bobber. Bobber's better than that, surely.
Yeah, yeah, and that just solidified my love for the Jedi's over the Sith Lords. So,
Brilliant. Brilliant.
um, Dan, but you did ask about my history. So why don't I tell you and the listeners a bit about that? So, yeah, I guess it starts with I actually studied marketing and management at university, which I was at the marketing meetup in March in London, which is a
Mm,
meetup of maybe 500 marketers. It's a brilliant event hosted by Joe Glover, and about 500 marketers in the room, and I asked people to raise their hands if they studied marketing at university, and I think it was less than 5%. So it's
yeah.
really interesting because, and I think that's a really good thing. By the way, I think marketers, the most talented marketers, are cross discipline. They come into the job with another discipline, whether that's art, whether that's accounting, whether that's finance, whatever it is. If you can bring another discipline in,
Yeah.
which is essentially what I do with my podcast as well with psychology, you get a lot more value. But I studied marketing mainly because I started a business management degree and couldn't do the accounting module, so I had to switch to the module to a version of the degree which didn't include marketing. I then went into my first job, which was at a tech company called Brandwatch, and they did social media monitoring. And so what we were selling at the time was this ability to analyze all of the social media comments around your brand and figure out what they say about you, which really back then was really exciting. Now
Yeah.
it's kind of seen as like, why on earth would you want to see what people are writing on X? It's all garbage. But back then, people were really excited to see when
Yeah.
folks tweeted about Ben and Jerry's. And I went into that job, Dan, being, I won't lie, quite cocky because I'd done all right at university. I'd got a first. I'd won this like £1,000 novelty check. Like really
Yeah,
one
yeah.
of those novelty checks for
One
like
of those
winning a
big
marketing
ones.
prize.
Yeah.
Yep. Um, Spent it on video games. What a waste of money. Anyway, got one of those checks, and then went into my job and thought, I'll be quite good at this. And I was asked to do things like create a blog that people will read, write a newsletter letter that people will open, create a sales deck for our sales team that will convert. And I was awful at all of those jobs because what I had been taught
Yeah.
was high level strategy,
Yeah.
how to do a SWOT analysis, why M&As often fail. And when it came down to the actual tactical day to day decisions you have to make as a marketer, basically persuading people constantly, I had none of the tools needed to do it. And it wasn't until I sort of stumbled across the world of behavioral science, read books like Influence and The Choice Factory, got to work a bit with Richard Shotton and learn
Mm.
more about behavioral science. I actually started to see how effective those principles were, applied those principles to my job, and then became a much better marketer, not a great marketer, but an okay marketer by
Yeah.
applying those principles. And then my career progressed, went into director role at Brandwatch, then moved to a company called Hotjar, then onto a company called Buffer. And I was doing the podcast in the background. Maybe we can get onto that in a bit. But then in 2024, went full time on the podcast.
Love that. Love that. I'm just trying to think where my education for sports science comes into marketing, and
Yeah.
I'm not seeing the translation there. Like, I wanted to be a physio. I actually, yeah, I
Yeah.
went to study sports science and ended up just like dropping out and not liking it, and then basically accidentally falling into marketing. Um,
Yeah.
not sure I can draw too many parallels between those.
Oh,
But I'm
you
afraid.
can. You can. What is marketing if it's not getting rid of people's pains and aches and
Oh,
pains? That's
okay.
exactly what it is, isn't it?
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. See, this is why, Phil. This is why you host Nudge. This is why you're the behavioral science expert. Do you know what? Actually, you made a good point about the things you learn at university. Because obviously, I didn't go to university to study marketing because I wanted to be a physio. But it's really interesting. I've had this conversation a lot with marketers that have been to uni who understand theory, like they understand marketing theory, business theory, but they don't understand how to do and how to actually like get the job done at the junior level. And yeah, it's really interesting because the junior marketers that come in like I did, you get really good at the tactical, like actionable things, but you
Mm,
don't understand any of the theory, and you have to learn that. And it's almost like a
mm,
bit of a reverse for the people that have been to university. So yeah, just
mm.
thought I'd share that anecdote because it's something that I think is very common, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd never thought about it that way, Dan, but I think you're right. I think, and maybe I've underplayed how important this has been in my life, but because if you have studied marketing, you obviously understand return on investment. You obviously understand that a significant investment is needed into marketing to even make a splash. You intuitively understand things like the mere exposure rule. Like you have to, if you create
Yeah,
an ad, people have to see it 7 times until it will sink in. And I do think perhaps there is, folks who have never studied this before maybe naively think, well, if we just create one really good poster, people
yeah,
will come to our festival. It just doesn't work that way. Like I think if you study marketing, you get an understanding that people see what is it, 50,000 messages a day. That number changes wherever you hear it, but it's
yeah,
more than it's more than 1,000. And you just will not cut through the noise unless people are exposed to you probably 7 times, but more likely over a dozen times. And it's only at that point when people start to actually perceive the message you're creating. So that I think you're right. There are some sort of very standard sort of laws of marketing that if you study it, you intuitively pick up on. And if you haven't studied marketing, maybe it just takes a bit longer for those laws to sink in.
yeah, yeah. I think so. So let's get on to the behavioral science side of your career, and I'd
Mm,
love to hear more about where that passion started and the
mm,
passion to start Nudge, really, because creating a podcast on like you have to be passionate about what you're talking about, to go into the hundreds of episodes and put in the graft ultimately,
mm.
to stick it out when at first I've told the story, multiple times, but like the first episode, actually the first month of Demand Decoded, we had 3 downloads. And I think that was my mum, my dad, and my sister. And then in the next month, I think, we were up to like 15 or so. Like it was terrible. It was so slow. But yeah, just hearing about, that journey, learning behavioral science and how you've really become like a well-known voice in that space.
Yeah. Well, I think 3 to 15 in the first 2 months. It might even beat me, Dan. I don't think mine was much higher back in 2019 when I started. But my love for behavioral science started before 2019. Like I mentioned, I'd read Influence by Robert
Yeah.
Cialdini, which is, he's the godfather of persuasion. He's a sort of icon in the marketing world. A lot of the stuff he's written about back in the 80s still holds up. Those 6 areas of influence he wrote about, they've been studied repeatedly since, and they still are relevant. And I just remember reading stuff like, because one of my jobs at Brandwatch was help the sales team sell more. And
Mm.
there's a line in this book, it's actually a reader's story, a reader sort of using anchoring, which was one of Cialdini's sort of principles that he eulogized about. Um, Using anchoring to sell more. And the the example the reader gave was so good. He was selling software, B2B software, which is what we were saying. And he always struggled, this salesman, to persuade people that the cost of the software, which was all kind of eye-wateringly high, was worthwhile. And when he read about anchoring, and anchoring, just for the listeners who don't know, is this principle which basically says that the first piece of information you see has a huge anchor. It influences the rest of the information you perceive. So Kahneman and Amos Tversky, 2 researchers, sort of identified this principle. The way they did it was wonderful. They had a wheel of fortune which you span, and it either landed on like 150 or 15 every time, so it was weighted. But the participants didn't know that; they thought it could land everywhere. So they would spin the wheel of fortune, and then they would ask participants how many countries in the UN are from Africa,
Mm.
which is a for an American in Michigan, believe where the study was. It's really hard to guess that accurately because you just wouldn't know. Might be able to tell how many countries are in Africa, but you'd struggle to then say, well, how many are in the UN?
Yeah.
Some would first see a number which is 150, and they would be told that number has nothing to, is, or they would say it's nothing to do with your guess, but you're just asked, is it higher or lower than this number, and then give a specific guess. So it comes into your awareness, but it's not meant to influence your guess. Anyway, when it lands on 150, people guess, I think it's 50% higher. When it lands on 15, they guess 50% lower in terms of guessing how many countries. So we are anchored by this initial piece of information. Now, how do you take that and apply it to a business world? Well, one of the readers of Robert Cialdini's book reads this study and decides that when he introduces his eye-watering price for the B2B software, rather than just saying the price, right before he says it, he makes a joke. And he says, by the way, this won't cost you $1 million. And they sort of giggle because it's like, oh yeah, that would be ridiculous. Imagine if
Mhm.
this cost $1 million. And then he shows the actual price, which is $20,000 a year, whatever it is. And he says that one line turned, I think, 50% or turned half of his failures into successes. Like almost overnight. Nothing about his presentation changed. He just added a slight anchor and it made the price seem far more appealing. And that just, stories like that, and there are so many other stories like that, got me hooked on behavioral science. It made me so excited because it made me realize that there's magic in marketing, that very small changes you make, or the ways you understand how human, if you understand how humans make decisions, you can subtly alter the way you talk about your product or service or offering and make that far more appealing than it otherwise would have been without actually having to change that product or service or offering. And I think that really got me hooked. So I was always fascinated by behavioral science. I always tried to apply it to my work. And then I remember listening to Bruce Daisley's podcast, Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat. Loved that podcast and thought, oh, I'd love if this podcast was all about behavioral science, I think was my thought. And then looked for a few other shows about behavioral science. And at the time, back in 2018, I think I was looking, sort of struggled to find one that I
Yeah.
really liked, basically. And then I did what every narcissist white dude does, which is thinks, not you, Dan, but me, which is, um, well, if no one else has that podcast, why don't I create one? So in 2019, I emailed Richard Shotton, who wrote The Choice Factory, Steve Martin, who wrote Small Big with Cialdini, Sybil Yang, who did the studies on menus and how removing the currency number, the currency
Yes.
code from a menu can make people buy more. And then Adrian North, who played German music in supermarkets and got people to buy German wine and then did the same with French music and French wine. And they all agreed to come on. It was amazing. All of these people said, yeah, I'll come on to the show, which has no listeners.
Yeah.
Recorded those episodes. And then this is what I don't talk about very much, Dan, but I had those 4 recordings, 4 hours. And originally I was just going to upload those episodes, but I just sort of got scared and decided not to do it.
Mhm.
And this is during this period where I'm in sort of New Zealand waiting for Boba Fett because I'd
Yeah.
taken a
Okay.
sabbatical off
Not
work
getting
because they were,
tips.
yeah, not getting tips. And I was like, oh, I've got all these recordings, what to do with them? And I wanted to make them last longer. I wanted to get sort of 8 or 9 episodes out of it. And then this idea, which was, okay, rather than just taking these hour-long conversations and putting them on the podcast, why don't I edit their audio down into themes and storylines and find angles? So find this area where Sybil talks about the menu and then do an episode all on menu design, or find this area where Adrian talks about music and do an episode all about music. And then write my own script, weave it in, and create this sort of audio documentary, which really explains these concepts in quite a succinct style and would be quite different from other podcasts. But that came about because I just had this limitation, which was I was in New Zealand and I couldn't do any more recordings. So I just thought, well, I'll just do it that way. Created 9 episodes and yeah, never looked back. I did 2 episodes a week for the first sort of 5, well, maybe 5 years, 4 years, and then yeah, I just loved it and fell in love
Yeah.
and kept on creating.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. And yeah, I did want to talk to you about the podcast format because it's different to any podcast that I listen to out there. And interesting that you describe it as a audio documentary almost.
Mm,
That's a
mm,
really good way to position it because you're commentating basically like over the conversation. You're like narrating the story. And yeah, I hadn't come across that. And I like one of my questions to you was going to be why that? And it's funny that it's it's kind of just your way of adapting, right, to get more content. But I think that is a lesson for anybody, that like if you feel like you're limited in the actual information you can gather, finding novel ways to extract more value from that is always something like to look into and do. Like, we don't all have to be Diary of a CEO with
Mm,
2 to 3 hour long episodes on a podcast. We also don't need to do this kind of format where we interview, right? Like a lot of the
mm,
time, we don't actually have external guests on this podcast a ton.
yeah, yeah.
It's just like me and Phil or Josh, like just sat in the studio chatting. And I think, yeah, just finding what works for you, like in your current situation, is super important. And yeah, love the way that you've adapted there. That's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. I think it differentiates. Like, so for those of you who haven't listened to Nudge, it's rather than being an hour long show, it's sort of 25 minutes with audio from a guest that I have interviewed, but then me sort of talking over that audio and inserting commentary into that audio, which adds a bit of color background to what they're saying. And the reason that works with Nudge is almost everybody I interview is an author. They've written a book, and I've
Yeah.
read the book, and I'm talking to them about the book. And usually, when you interview an author, they're really good at giving a high level summary of what they're talking about. But then I often want to then go, well, let's actually go to that part of the book and talk about the study they're referring to. So it had 500 people in, here's what they showed, here's what they did, and here's the result, and then cut back to them. And that allows the show to be succinct, have a lot of information in it without feeling really heavy, because you can get it all in, within like a 5 minute segment and then move on to something else. And it also allows me to be very creative. So, like,
Yeah.
I did a show recently about the enhanced games, just because I was interested in it, basically, and looking at sort of how this marketing stunt, if it paid off or if it didn't. My conclusion was it maybe didn't, but I like applauded them for doing something quite
Mm.
creative. And I didn't have a guest on that, but I was able to just get loads of footage and clips from interviews with the CEO of Enhanced Games, from news reports on it, from actual audio from the actual games. And it just allows you to create these sort of episodes, me to create these episodes, which I think are kind of just allowed to break the mold from the typical interview
Yeah.
and do something which really excites me. But it works because most of the people I interview write books, and you do occasionally. Like, I've had someone email me in the past being like, "So why don't you interview anyone? Like, you clearly you, like, all these people that are on your podcast aren't actually coming on your podcast, right? You've just
Right.
found them talking about these stuff somewhere else." And it's like, oh, okay, maybe that's not great, because they think I actually don't do the interviews.
Yeah.
And there were slightly other styles of the show as well. Like, another style would be that I do that sort of cutting, which I've spoken about, and then cut briefly to me actually having listened into the conversation. And I've
Mm.
tested that a few times, but it just makes it slightly longer. So it's not perfect by any means, but it allows me to make episodes which I think are really valuable and succinct, and B, I think most importantly, because really you have to love podcasting if you're going to do it for 7 years. It allows me to sort of stretch a bit of a creative muscle and
Yeah.
create episodes that I just want to create. Today I'm probably going to work on an episode around if the UK's social media ban will work, based on
Oh,
the sort of psychology behind it. And you can't, that's hard to do if you're just
yeah.
doing a sort of very strict and rigid format.
Yeah, that is that. Well, I'll give that one a listen for sure, because I'm keen to know. Do you know something that's really interesting at the moment? Is marketers talk B2B marketers talking about human connection and
Mm,
and I think you've spoken about this on Nudge before, which is like, instead of you don't really think about B2C or B2B,
mm,
it's human to human, right? And I think that's people will hear that. Marketing leaders will hear that and just think like, oh, all right, human to human, like where's the data type thing. And I think that's easy because it's something that creatives can often lead with as a kind of an excuse to not get a result. Perhaps they like say, oh, well, it's about the emotion, it's about the connection. But actually, when we come back to science, like, it is human to human, right? It doesn't matter if you are buying, something for $10 or $10,000. the principles that actually like enable the cognitive reasons for buying or not buying are similar.
Mm. It's You're hitting on a topic which I think is vital for marketers to understand. So I'm recording this from Bristol, which is where I live at the moment. And Bristol's probably most famous for a bridge. And then after the bridge, it's
Yeah.
most famous for Banksy. So almost
Yeah.
everyone listening to this would have heard of Banksy, street artist. And when I ask listeners to imagine Banksy, go on, do it now, you will imagine probably a dude in a hoodie with a spray paint can and a mask over his face or something. One person. And there's lots of reasons why you would imagine Banksy as one person. He or she, probably a he, um, almost certainly started off alone. Um, in on their website, they use personal pronouns, so they say I do not endorse this or that. They do the same on their Instagram captions. Very few when they actually write. They'll say I'm opening a shop or I've just released this.
Mm.
And yet, there's lots of evidence. There's a great article in the Conversationalist that suggests that Banksy just cannot be a solo individual. You have things like Disneyland, which was this giant Disneyland esque theme park he created, well, inverted Disneyland theme park he created, which had to be created by multiple artists. He's got this thing called the Waldorf Hotel, which is the same. It's almost certain that Banksy is a group, is a collective of
Yeah.
artists, and yet he goes to some lengths to make it seem like it's just one person. And there's a good reason why he does that, and it links back to this human and human point. So Smith and Newman, and this is going back to your point, Dan, which is that there's evidence that backs this up. This isn't just gut instinct. Smith and Newman, two researchers in 2014, did a really incredible study. They gathered, I believe it was 500 people, and they showed them a sculpture. The sculpture is called Untitled Plastic Cups. Sounds rubbish. If you Google this sculpture, it's incredible. It's really cool. It's kind of breathtaking. It's 500,000 to 2 million. I couldn't get the exact number. Plastic cups stacked up in a way that if you stand 5 meters back and look at it, it looks like a snow covered mountain valley. It just looks like you're a bird and you're flying over a valley. But then if you get closer, it's just a load of stacked up plastic cups. It's a sort of beautiful piece of art. And Smith and Newman showed a bunch of people this art and asked them to evaluate it, rate it out of 7. But there was a twist. Some people are told that just one artist built this and that they took 30 hours. Some are told 2 built it, some are told 5 built it, some are told 10 built it. And what Smith and Newman find is that the ratings of the piece of art drop in tandem with the number of artists who made it. And this is kind of counterintuitive, right? You would assume individuals would prefer things that more people have invested time and effort into. And yet, what we find, because of this human human connection, is that if just one person has created something, we'll actually value it slightly more. This is why charity appeals often are more successful if they highlight the plight of a single individual. You
Mm.
know, young Julia from Rwanda has
Yeah.
HIV. Please donate is far more successful than 500,000 people in Rwanda are suffering with HIV, for example. Um, and Smith and Newman have discovered this with art, and it's exactly why Banksy goes to some lengths to make it seem like he is an individual, because he knows that his art will be perceived as more valuable, more impressive, if it's believed he's a solo entrepreneur, solo creator. Now, brands do the same thing, weirdly. Like, it would be ridiculous to say that Big Macs are created by a solo individual when 1.7 million people work at McDonald's. And yet, McDonald's have financed the creation of a movie called The Founder, where
Yeah.
they sort of eulogize about their original founder. Steve Jobs and Apple do the same. Richard Branson with Virgin does the same thing. And you get lots of companies do it. Dyson do it with Richard Dyson as well. And you get companies doing it in this way. But I think a more successful way to create that human and human connection is what a British cosmetic company do. This is a company called Lush. They invented the bath bomb. And Lush have 7 founders. They don't bother talking about their founders in their copy. What they do instead, in terms of creating that human to human connection, is on pretty much every Lush product you buy, there's a sticker stuck to that product which says, this product is made by and then the name of the Lush employee who
Mm.
made it. So the shower gel in my shower at the moment is made by someone called Eileen, and there's a little cartoon picture of Eileen on there as well. Now I know that Lush have 5,000 employees, and I know that a lot of those employees are involved in the creation of the shower gel. And yet there's something about the sticker made by Eileen which makes me value that product more. And I'm sure if you put it head to head against a faceless cosmetic brand who is selling shower gel, I just would value the one that was made by an individual more for this same reason. We value this human to human connection. When we know that art is made by one person, we think it's better than when it's made by 10. And if we know that our shower gel has been packaged by an individual, we're more likely to value it than if we think it's been packaged by a faceless organization. So there's real value in brands highlighting the people behind their work.
I just wanted to interrupt this episode to tell you about another show that's in the HubSpot podcast network, Nudge, hosted by Phill Agnew. Nudge is the UK's #1 marketing podcast, breaking down the hidden psychology behind what we do and why we do it. There's no BS, no fluff, just smart, science-backed insights that actually work. Recent guests include Rory Sutherland, Robert Cialdini, and Dan Pink. Marketers will love this show. I know you will because I do. And it's because it discusses the psychology behind customer decisions and the secrets to successful marketing. And in one recent episode, I'll pick on Robert Cialdini's episode because it was really, really insightful. It spoke about 16 years ago, there was a chain of Chinese restaurants that wanted to increase sales without changing price. They didn't change the product, they didn't change the service, the chef, the food. Instead, they just changed 2 words on their menu and increased sales by 18%. They are the small nudges that you can make in marketing, in sales, to actually make a big difference to sales and to revenue. Listen to Nudge wherever you get your podcasts. Right now, every B2B marketing team is trying to figure out AEO, where they stand, whether it matters for them, and what they're supposed to actually do about it. The best place to start is knowing where you stand. We're offering a full AEO analysis of your brand's visibility across AI search engines, how often you're mentioned, what you're being cited for, and how your competitors are showing up. Then we'll walk you through the findings on a call with clear next steps. And we're doing all of this for free. You can request your analysis in the show notes below. Yeah. And I suppose if we draw that into B2B, thinking about like SaaS businesses, tech businesses, people that often don't have a face for their business. I find, when we're talking about the Bransons of the world, the Steve Jobs, like the people who were the face of the company or still are the face of the company in some ways. Do you think then that is a essential part of B2B marketing now that, the $10 million SaaS business needs the founder to be the face. It needs somebody to be the face because if we draw back into, how much people perceive value when they like connect with an individual, is
Mm,
that something that's, now more important for
mm,
B2Bs to
mm.
realize as well?
As always with these tips, it's a single lever you can pull, and there will be examples of B2B companies that have a pioneering founder that really creates a lot of value for this business. But then there'll be examples of those who don't. The rule that maybe I would encourage B2B brands to think about is it's a rule known as the goal dilution effect. The basic idea here is the more you do, the harder it is for customers to kind of conceptualize the value you provide. So the best example of this is video conference software back in pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, the video conference software space, which was basically a B2B space
Yeah.
back in the day. It's now more B2C, but back at pre-COVID, it was definitely B2B. It was full of Zoom, WebEx, TeamViewer, GoToMeeting, and it was a really saturated market and nobody had any advantage. And yet we all know that by 2023, every single person on the planet was pretty much using Zoom. Eventually Teams came in as well, but it was Zoom.
Yeah.
And I went back and looked at I used the Wayback Machine, and I looked at the websites from the two main competitors, which was Zoom and GoToMeeting. And I looked at them and I thought, what made Zoom take off
Mm.
versus GoToMeeting? And when you look on GoToMeeting, it's kind of full on. There is 6 different products for you to choose from.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
GoToMeeting, there's GoToWebinar, there's GoToRoom, there's Open Room, there's GoToConference, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot to choose from. Whereas if you go to Zoom, they had all of that functionality, but they only had one product to buy, and it was Zoom. And there was a free version and there was a paid version, and that
Mm.
was it. And so Zoom's offering was this is all in one. It's one thing you get versus GoToMeetings was we've got 6 different things. And Zoom became successful. Now, why do I think their focus helped them become successful? Well, it's due to this behavioral science wisdom, which is known as goal dilution effect. And this is studies by Ayelet Fishback. And the studies are so simple and they're so wonderful because you can't forget the findings.
Yeah.
She did it with lots of different things, cardio exercise, biking, but the main one is it's tomatoes. So she told people benefits of eating tomatoes. And some people heard 2 benefits. So they heard that tomatoes are great at reducing your cancer risk and reducing your blood pressure. And she told another group of people who were the same type of people that tomatoes only helped with one benefit. They only helped with reducing your risk of cancer. And then she asked people later on in the study, how likely are you to eat tomatoes and how healthy do you think tomatoes are? And counterintuitively, those who hear only one benefit think tomatoes are healthier than those who hear two, which doesn't make sense. You would think that if you hear 2 benefits, surely you would say it's more helpful. But what you find is that the more you tell, the more reasons you give us why you should buy or use or eat something, the less trustworthy you actually seem. And it's easier for us to hook our benefits onto one thing and think about one thing than it is to hook them onto many. And this, I think, is why Zoom took off. It's why in the UK, M&S have launched an extremely successful brand called the Only brand, where they highlight that they only have 3 ingredients in a specific product. It just seems far more, successful than highlighting many.
Mm.
And the gold dilution effect, I think, comes into to this example of people as well. If you know that a B2B brand has this incredible founder that you idolize, and that's what you think about when you think of that brand, that's more likely to sort of stick in your mind and persuade than if there are 10
Yeah.
reasons. And the best example I can give to this is like imagine you're trying to convince your mate to go on a date with your other mate. you, you could say, "Oh, she's funny. She's really kind. She's like super diligent. She's quite healthy. She goes on runs all the time. Oh, and she's really good at one-liners as well." You could list all these different reasons, or you could just say she's great fun.
Mm.
And I think if you say she's great fun, they're actually more likely to go on the date because
Yeah.
it's suddenly
Otherwise, it
seems
feels
more
like
believable.
you're reaching, right? It's like,
Yeah,
oh yeah, we can do all these. Like, she's got all of these qualities. This. It's like you're trying to force that on me now, aren't you? Rather than just me making the decision to be like, oh yeah, she's good fun.
yeah.
It's This is like an interesting conversation that we have around like homepage messaging on websites as well, because often brands try to be everything for everyone because they don't want to limit their reach. They don't want to limit their ability to, you know, have multiple customers from lots of different sectors and industries and places and things. But off like our advice to brands is that you really, really need to define like who you are, what you sell, and who you sell that for, and who you do it best for. Because ultimately, that is going to allow you to reach those people who you're best served to sell to in the most impactful way possible. It's so often like you go to a website and you see the brand tagline being used, in messaging. But actually, if you just think about who you're trying to reach, that one individual, like in that company, who would it be and what is that message for them? That's
Mhm.
exactly what you need to get across. And yeah, it's just interesting you hearing you talk about all of these studies and things, because there's lots of different areas in like B2B copy, advertising, things where like all of these come into place. Even if you're not thinking about it, perhaps you might not have heard of any of these studies, but like the principles come through in a lot of the way that people talk about best practices, because they have studied these things. Now, I'd be interesting to hear if there are any tactical examples you can think of off the top of your head, where And it might be drawing on books or episodes that you've done in the past, where it's like, company X changed this and they achieved this. To yeah, kind of draw some examples for the listeners.
Oh yeah, about specifically gold dilution effect or anything? Dan?
Anything.
Anything? Oh, there's so many.
What's your
While we're on
favorite?
while we're on the case of when you were talking about homepages, I thought about another company that I sort of fell in love with over lockdown, and I've actually sort of fallen out of love with since. It's a company called Loom.
Mm,
And do you know Loom? Yeah, what they allowed people to do is record video
yeah,
messages, send people a video message of you and your screen, pop it over to them, and then they can watch that message and hear what you're talking about. Really, really vital during lockdown and COVID, because it was essentially the equivalent of walking over to their
yeah,
desk and showing them something on your laptop, and didn't involve having to set up a Zoom call, or send an email.
yeah,
And there were loads of companies doing that exact software, or offering that exact software at the time, except all of those companies fell into the trap that you just talked about, Dan. They spoke about all of their long list of benefits. They said, we offer HD recording software. You get up to 32 gigabytes
yeah,
of recording with us. You get your first 14 days for free, whatever else it is. It's really all lots of different features and benefits. Whereas Loom, they did two things. One, they focused, which we spoke about with the gold dilution effect, but also they used concrete phrases. I'll get into why concrete phrases are important in a bit. But Loom basically just said, cut your need for meetings in half with Loom. So rather than talking about all their benefits, they just spoke about it in a way we can all understand and be concrete with, which is, oh, Loom helps us not spend all of our time in meetings
yeah,
because you can just record what you want to say really quickly. Now that works, and this is vital for B2B companies to be aware of. That works due to this principle of concrete phrases. Now, concrete phrases is the idea that if we are able to visualize something in our minds, we're far more likely to remember it, we're far more likely to take action on it. Whereas if something is, if we can't visualize it, it's really hard for us to do that. So this was a study by Ian Begg in the 1970s. He showed people a number of different words and phrases, and then got them to do something else, and then asked them again about those words and phrases, and saw how memorable they were. And he found that stuff that you could visualize, like fast car, square door, round window, was, I think it was something like 14% more memorable than the same types of language, like innovative quality, for example, or cutting edge tech,
mm,
which you cannot visualize.
yeah,
So when you can visualize something, we're more likely to take action. And so many follow-up studies have been done on this. One of my favorites is with food products. So for example, a pack of Oreos, researchers tested whether you say this pack of Oreos contains 250 grams, or whether you could say it contains 14 cookies. 14 cookies you can visualize. When
yeah,
you use the 14 cookies frame, people are far more likely to buy. And Loom, of course, are doing the same thing. We can visualize meetings. We can visualize how frustrating meetings are. We can visualize the relief we feel when we don't have to spend half an hour in a meeting. And we can visualize the relief we feel when we do that same thing in 5 minutes. We cannot visualize 32 gigabytes of memory. We cannot visualize 4K record. Maybe we
yeah,
can visualize 4K, but it's like that's a push. It would be
yeah,
better to just say video recording that looks cleaner than 2020
mm,
vision or something like that. And so I think opting for concrete phrases is very valuable. And then this brings us back to probably the most overused line in marketing, but it's overused because it really did work, which was how Apple introduced the iPod. They did not say we offer 329 megabytes worth of data. They said iPod, 1,000 songs in your
yeah,
pocket. You can visualize that. You can visualize 1,000 CDs. You can visualize your pocket. That's mind bending that they're able to make that claim. Whereas the exact same claim, which is what Philips were making with their products, and Sony with their Walkman, which is 259 megabytes, has none of the impact. So it's the
yeah.
same message, slightly different way, slightly different angle, totally changes the impact.
Mm, fascinating. I think the same with cameras. And I think some of the messaging has changed with phone cameras because I remember, when cameras were getting better and better on smartphones. Like brands would use the megapixel associated with that camera,
Yeah.
and that means nothing, right? Like
Yeah.
I could not tell you the difference, like in resolution between a 12 megapixel and a 15 megapixel. Like it literally means nothing to me. But
Yeah.
if you were to tell me it's like studio quality um resolution shot on your phone, that's like, okay, I visualize
Yes.
that.
Yeah. I
That's
remember
yeah.
this, right? We were all hooked on megapixel. I don't remember, like, what happened to that?
What
Why
is a
is
megapixel,
nobody?
by the way?
What's a megapixel?
I don't
Why
know.
was eight? Why was eight better than seven? Why were we all so hooked on this? And it's because, like, the counterpoint here is when that is all you have, of course you get hooked on it, right? When that is what companies tell you about, of course you're going to be like, okay, well, okay, 8 megapixels better than 7. Let's go for the 8 one. Oh, they've got 8.5, but they've got zoom. So we all focused on that, and it was Apple again, and Apple have done concrete phrases so many times. They probably 15, maybe 10 years ago now, did a campaign called "Shot on iPhone," and the campaign was
I
simply
remember
put up a
this.
load of billboards, put up a load of TV ads, and just have a little subtitle at the bottom of the screen which said this was shot on iPhone. That is concrete. Forget
Mhm.
telling people how many megapixels, just show them the quality. Apple did the same when they introduced the MacBook Air. Steve Jobs didn't say this is the thinnest laptop ever. He probably did say that, but he showed it by bringing it onto stage in a tiny little envelope, undoing the envelope and pulling it out, and it shocked people. He did the same when he introduced the iPad. He had a pack of cards and he showed it and he says, we all know how small a pack of cards is. Well, the iPod is the same size. He got it up on
Mhm.
screen at the same size. These using concreteness, using these concrete visual things that we can remember, changes how we perceive these things. And this happened with megapixels. It happens with other things. We're far more likely to value things when we can visualize it. I think shot on iPhone is a great example of that.
Do you think all of that was intentional? Like, do you think um the marketer, whoever like was behind Steve Jobs um presentations
Yeah.
and speaking engagements, like were they thinking like, right, behavioral science taught us this, like there's this study that shows concrete phrases does this, and like we need to lean on these elements, or were they just like good at understanding people?
Yeah. Really good question. So I did for real keynotes of Nudge. You can go back like 4 years, and I did a 2-part episode on Steve Jobs, and one of those parts was me watching every single keynote he did, and picking out all of the times he said something which was quite clearly linked to a behavioral science principle and quite clearly valuing from it. So, for instance, he would always start his keynotes. Pretty much every single keynote, he would start by talking about the amount of work Apple had done. So he would say, God, if you'd been here in the park, if you'd been here at weekends, you would have seen the parking lots full because the office staff have been in every weekend trying to get this done. We've never worked harder on something. Pretty much say that every time. He would use anchoring all the time. So when he introduced the iPad, which again was a product that many people didn't even think they needed, it was, was it a Mac? Was it an iPhone? It was sort of in between. Lots of people said they wouldn't spend more than sort of $200 on a product like that. But some of the journalists estimated that it would cost $1,000 because of the size of the touchscreen. He took that $1,000 example, put up on screen behind him. Some of you in this room think this product could cost $999. Had this big sign behind him saying $999. That sets the anchor. He then says, I'm so proud today to tell you that, and then clicks. We've managed to get this price down. And then the 999 smashes into a million pieces, and then 499 reveals. And the journalists in the room who had basically been saying for the past week, we don't want to spend more than $200, when the 499 is revealed, are whooping and cheering because they've been hooked in by his anchor. It's the exact same as this won't cost you £1,000,000. Suddenly £20,000 seems good value. So Steve Jobs, he does this time and time again. He's got the concrete phrases example. He knows about the peak end rule as well, which is the idea that we remember the peak of an experience and the end, which is why he always finished with one more thing. He held back a feature, like FaceTime, for example, was a
Yeah.
feature. They did a whole keynote, 2-hour-long keynote. And then at the end, he says, oh, and there's one more thing. And he gets a call and he answers the call, and it's Johnny Ive's face. He says, this is real. We're having a real conversation. He can see my face. I can see his face. Everyone listening to this now thinks this is the most ubiquitous technology. It's like this has been everywhere. At the time, this blew people's minds. They couldn't, and they held this
Yeah.
back. they should have opened with it. It was easily the best technology of the day, but they hold it back because they know about the peak end rule, the idea that the final thing we hear about has an outweighted impact on our experience, which is why the best restaurants in the world care very carefully about the final thing you experience when you're going through that restaurant. I
Mm.
had Will Guidara, the owner of the best restaurant in the world, come on the Nudge podcast to talk to me about this. But Steve Jobs, I don't actually think he had read about maybe all of the studies. I think he definitely knew about human psychology.
Yeah.
And I think he definitely knew that the way you share a message can change how people perceive it. I think he had a unique understanding of how people make decisions and was able to create language and comms that persuaded people. There's sort of no denying that if you watch his keynotes. And I think maybe he, if you chatted to him one on one, would say, yeah, he sort of knew about the idea of, if we concrete phrases, maybe he wouldn't use that phrase, but he knew
Mm.
about that idea. But I think he knew it intuitively. And I think actually, if you go back, even if you look at sort of how Julius Caesar ran his army,
We're going back a while now.
yeah, there's principles he was using which are just baked in behavioral science. Like
Yeah.
he always ate with his soldiers, and they were eating rubbish. They ate a type of potato which was apparently so bland it made you want to throw up. And Caesar had brought along, pigs and all that he could eat, but he knew that psychologically, if he was seen to eat with his soldiers, it would increase their morale.
Mm.
You're one of us. You're one of us. You've got skin in the game. And Winston Churchill would do the same thing. Like, it was really risky for Winston Churchill to like leave the bunker at any point. And he would famously always go out and inspect damage across the blitz. Winston Churchill needed persuading not to go to D-Day. He wanted to
Mm.
be on the boat
Yeah.
at D-Day. And it was like the king had to intervene and say, you cannot do this. But he
Yeah.
knew what Caesar knew. It's like, if I'm involved, then people will value me more. So there are these greats across history that understand human psychology without having ever read a study
Yeah.
about it. They just intuitively knew it.
Well, I think that's what like you say, the greats, the people who lead like amazing armies and people and teams, they just know, like, because that's baked within their like DNA to react to signals and like subconsciously identify, like, if I do this thing, if I modify this behavior, I can see it having this impact in people. Uh, they're not studying like the theory behind that; they just see it. I'd love to spend like the last 10 minutes talking about Nudge, like as a podcast, because Phill Agnew, behavioral science extraordinaire, right? But like Nudge is awesome as a podcast, and I'd love to hear like how you've grown it so much over the years, and like to allow you to ultimately dive in full time and like give everything you have to this podcast, because a lot of our listeners are um if they have got podcasts, if they've got other content streams, kind of giving some advice to how do you, like, one, stick it out, and two, grow it and make it something truly valuable, not just for you, but for the audience too.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Thank you for saying all that, Dan. That's really sweet of you to say. And yeah, it means a lot because I've been working very hard on it for the past 8 years now. And I think the weird thing about podcasting, to sort of, you've hit on this at the start, Dan, but the weird thing about podcasting is it is not social media. And that's a
Mm.
good thing. So there is no algorithm which will provide us with hockey stick growth. You will never see a podcast that goes from 0 downloads to 1 million overnight and then back down to 0, which is very typical on TikTok. Happened to
Yeah.
me on TikTok multiple times. I've had 1 million views on TikTok. I thought I'd be a Dragon's Den panelist after that. And it
Yeah.
turned out people were just insulting me because I had a slightly burnt nose. That's another story. But with podcasting, that will never happen. It is slow and steady growth. Now, the negative of that is it puts so many people off. What
Mhm.
you get is there's this stat, and I don't know if it's still true, but if you make 10 podcast episodes, you become in the top 10 podcasts globally, because of all the podcasts in the world, only 10% are still creating episodes and have more than 10 at this point in time, which means basically that people give up quite quickly. And I think it's because we've become conditioned to to algorithmic growth rather than sort
Mm.
of real world consistent growth. So with podcasting, it takes time, it takes effort. You won't see an overnight success. But the benefit of that is when you get to a point where you have an audience. So, Dan, I don't know the size of your audience, but there are people who listen every single week. And that is quite incredible that every single week you have a set
Yeah.
amount of people who come back and come back and come back. And that does not happen with almost any other form of content, really. Not many people. It maybe happens with newsletter. That's about it in terms of things that
Maybe
companies create.
YouTube, but you could kind of say that that's
I
almost
don't
a
think it
similar
does happen with YouTube. Yeah, I don't think it, because I've got a YouTube video with 550, 500,000 views, and I've got 330,000 subscribers, and yet the most recent video I put up is still struggling to get to 1,000 views.
Yeah.
It's just algorithmic. It's
Yeah.
just not. It's not hit the algorithm. I haven't got it quite right. Whereas I can do an episode, like a very popular recent episode I did was on something called the Scottish tea scandal, which was this fraudster who sold Scottish tea, and he wasn't actually selling Scottish tea; it was Chinese tea. And I sort of talked people through the psychology and the marketing tactics that this fraudster had used to persuade people, because I think there were some lessons there, even though he used it for all the wrong reasons. And that episode did slightly better than average, 5% better than average.
Yeah.
Again, you don't see that hockey stick growth. But then I do an episode on like habits, like the most recent episode on habits, which is less sort of enticing for people, but it gets about the same amount of listeners because the listeners are there. You build an audience, and that audience is not reliant on an algorithm to tell them what to listen to. You build that trust and that connection. And that, so few things that means is, one, you're never going to get the same eye-wateringly big numbers that you would get
Yeah.
if you had a big TikTok account. Even the top podcast in the UK, I think, doesn't get more than 1 million listeners per episode. And the top TikToker in the UK, I think the probably 1,000th top TikToker in the UK gets more than 1 million views a day. And so you're like, it's very easy to say, well, podcasting's dead. And then at the same time, you know that podcasting influences people far more than
Yeah.
TikTok would.
Well, I mean, of course, like the trouble I find in B2B is that people are trying to draw measurement between channels and measure the same way because they want some unified dashboard metric to present to the board or management or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But one download of a podcast, somebody sat with you driving in the car, commuting, on their run, whatever it may be, for an hour is really different to 30 seconds of somebody dancing in the office on TikTok. Like the quality of that engagement far outweighs um, the virality that you might get on a TikTok video. Can I actually make a suggestion for an episode on Nudge?
Oh, yes, please.
Right. I don't know if you drink a lot of beer, but
Oh,
I'm
I,
partial.
I do like a tipple.
Yeah. So Madri, um, I would love to know how Madri like have branded themselves so well as a Spanish beer when it is
Yeah,
British brewed, and
yeah,
like it almost feels like everyone now kind of knows it's British brewed, but like it just came out of the woodworks as like, oh,
yeah,
this new Spanish beer, like it's called Madri, but
yeah.
like it's British, and I would love to learn more about the psychology behind how they did that so effectively.
Yeah. It's amazing that, isn't it? Madry
Yeah,
is carling. Like, and for
basically.
the Brits
Yeah,
in your room, carling is the non-Brits. Carling is the equivalent of dog piss. It is
yeah,
just, you would never,
it's really bad.
if you ordered carling at a pub in major city in the UK, and you go and see your mates afterwards, they would honestly be quite worried for your mental health. They'd be saying,
Yeah,
"What's going on here, mate?" And yet Madry is ordered everywhere. It's like everybody loves it. You go to an airport at the moment before a
everyone's
holiday,
on the
and
Madris.
everybody's drinking a Madry, and it is essentially the same beer. And yeah, what that is it would be a good episode, Dan, because it's all about this thing called the country of origin effect. So there's amazing studies on this. My favorite one is probably water. So they gave people sparkling water, and they told some people it was from France and some people it was from Austria. Now, both those countries are pretty similar, both nice
Mm,
countries to go to. I like Austria. I love hiking around Innsbruck. I also like hiking around Chamonix. But
Mm,
people in general prefer, they have a slight bias for France. And so when you tell people, and obviously the twist here is that the water is identical, but
yeah.
when you tell people it is from France, they are far more likely to say, oh, it's clearer, it looks clearer, the carbonation adds more fizz and texture in the mouth. I digest it a lot quicker. All of this rubbish they come up with just because they're told it's from France rather than Austria.
Yeah.
So imagine the difference between, I don't know where Carling's brewed. I think it might be Bolton. Imagine the difference between saying this is brewed in Bolton versus Barcelona. Like
Right.
it's
Yeah.
it's just going to have this effect on you. And
Yeah.
that's why, I mean, the same is true for Beer Moretti. I mean, Cafe Nero is such a great example of this. Slightly gone out of fashion, but 20 years ago, everybody was ordering coffee at Costa, Starbucks, Cafe Nero. Italian style coffee because
Mhm.
we have this preference. It's not. It's nothing Italian about Cafe Nero
Yeah.
except the pictures of Naples in black and white on the wall. Everything else, the beans are from Ethiopia, the staff are from Shrewsbury, and
Yeah.
the cups are. I mean, an Italian would never be seen drinking out of the bloody
Yeah.
soup glass cups that they give you to drink out of. And the same can be seen everywhere. There's all sorts of examples of this, but Madry is a good one. Maybe I will do an episode on that, Dan, because I would have great fun. I might even go to a pub and
Well,
interview
if
people
you
about it.
do, then like make sure you reference me that
Oh
it was
yeah,
my idea,
oh yeah,
and maybe have a pint of Madry to like
yeah.
compare at the time.
Blind taster. Oh, this sounds great fun.
What a great podcast that is. All right. Well, should we wrap it up there? I think, yeah, this has been such a fascinating episode, Phil. Like, I have
Thanks.
genuinely been a fan of Nudge for a long time. And I think a lot of people listening to this probably have listened to Nudge. I know a lot of friends I have heard of it and listened to it. So, yeah, I just thank you for sharing that insight with everybody because I think unless you study behavioral science, unless you're really in the weeds of it like you are now, I suppose, the ability to like dedicate so much time to it, you struggle to really gauge these concepts and actually understand the benefit it can have on business. And like Nudge is just a great way to consume like bite-sized versions of that information and bring it into everything we do in B2B.
Thanks, Dan. Well, thanks so much for having me on as well, and it's been an honor to speak to you. And yeah, you've given me an idea for probably a cracking episode. So I owe you a pint of Madry, I think.
Amazing. Cool. Right. Let's wrap it up there. Cheers, Phil.
Cheers, man.
Thanks for listening to the episode today. Before you head off, if AEO has been on your mind and you're not sure where to start, here's something worth doing right now. We're offering a full AI visibility analysis completely free. We'll look at how your brand is showing up across the major AI engines, what's influencing those results, how competitors compare, and what you should do about it. Then we'll walk you through all the findings on a call. Actual findings too, specific to your business with real next steps. Not a template, not a PDF, a proper analysis. You can request yours by clicking the link in the description below.